Sometimes the world can be quite depressing, filled with disappointments and tragic news cycles. Why then do we keep on living? Perhaps it is because, in spite of these things, we can still find solace in the small treasures that bring us joy. We can see beautiful sights, enjoy fresh air, eat meals that comfort us, engage in hobbies that entertain us, spend time with the ones we love, and look towards the future with hope. But what if the world stripped us of those simple pleasures and replaced them with nothing but dread, leaving us alone in a reality far darker than anything humanly possible, a chaotic world that is unnecessarily cruel as it distorts everything that made you feel safe and kept you sane? The fresh smell of nature now vile and repugnant. The comforting taste of a home-cooked meal, now an insult to your taste buds. The soft touch of a bed sheet, now slimy. The familiar sound of your friends' individual voices, transformed into one mass of uncanny shrieking. And the sight of the world, now replaced with pulsating flesh. This is what Fuminori Sakisaka must live through every day following a car accident that took the lives of both his parents and nearly left him dead as well. Fuminori managed to survive due to an experimental procedure at the cost of his world being irreparably altered, seeing the world he once knew grotesque and inhuman. Not wanting to let anyone know of this change for fear that he would be instantly disbelieved and thrown into a mental institution, Fuminori quietly suffers and further isolates himself from the caring people around him, who he now perceives as hideous monsters, eventually deciding that it's all too much to bear and that the only way to exist in this nightmare is to not exist at all. That is, until he meets a girl he can actually touch and talk to, someone who can keep him sane in this insane world, Saya, an equally isolated individual as she secretly lives at the hospital, searching for her one and only family member, her father who has gone missing. Thus, Fuminori and Saya begin a relationship as two broken people who have finally found happiness with each other, with Saya being the one thing that keeps Fuminori going, and Fuminori being the one help Saya has in finding her father, spawning a toxic spiral of codependence and prompting the question, when everything that keeps you human is gone, how far will you go to feel at peace again? Would you sacrifice the world for your own comfort? This is just one of the questions that the infamous visual novel No Uta will have you asking as it takes you along for its sickening journey. Within its disturbing narrative are a lot of complex ideas of morality, humanity, and relationships. Before I go any further, spoiler warning, and a very important content warning for heavy themes like flesh, blood, and muscle. Our story begins through Fuminori's eyes as he sits with his friends Omi, Yo, and Koji. Yet to him, they are indiscernible creatures that speak in nothing but gibberish. The cafe they gather at is similarly twisted, with masses of flesh invading every inch of the interior space. Attempting to pretend that everything is normal, Fuminori gives flat responses to their questions and barely makes any eye contact to avoid looking at the bile-spewing monsters any longer. Trapped in his own thoughts, Fuminori reflects, "Now these are but painful memories of days that will never return. The world as I knew it is gone." Soon after, he throws random money on the table to pay his bill and escape the social situation altogether. Before immediately heading home though, Fuminori goes to his weekly checkup with the surgeon Tanbo Ryoko and gives similarly dull responses, seemingly not wanting to let anyone in for fear that they wouldn't understand. The only piece of conversation that does interest him though is inquiring about Dr. Ogai, Saya's missing father, to which Ryoko says she doesn't know anything about, although she does know more than she lets on. Heading home is a similarly depressing experience to Fuminori, as even the trees and sky are distorted. But things do get better as he opens the door to his home and is greeted by Saya, whose voice drowns out the sorrow of the day, and whose presence seems to make everything calmer in his tormented mind. Saya is similarly happy to see him, having spent the whole day waiting for him to come home. As stated by Fuminori, she knows that she is my salvation, and for some reason is happy that I need her. As Saya goes to get the food she prepared for him, Fuminori enters the living room and remarks that he has painted some of the fleshy rooms of the house with colors he instead found pleasant, an attempt to cope with the sickening reality he is forced to live in. Saya then comes and serves him a dish she learned from TV, which obviously does not taste good to Fuminori. Saya remarks that she will try to make something better the next day. Just in their short time knowing each other, Fuminori and Saya have already become very attached to each other, and have begun taking on very traditional roles, not so dissimilar to a married couple. Saya acts like a homemaker, cooking meals for Fuminori, painting the house, and happily waiting for his return from school. Moreover, the both of them share a similar sentiment of not being able to live without the other, and not wanting to ever be apart for fear of being alone again. Fuminori in particular cries and asks what he has to do to make sure she never leaves him. Their relationship from the very beginning shows signs of a deep dependency on one another. Fuminori is already anxious about being abandoned by Saya and starts feeling like he isn't worthy of all the happiness she brings to his tragic life. Meanwhile, Saya states that they will just have to stay together forever, which plants a toxic seed in Fuminori's head that he must do anything to be with Saya. This seed starts to sprout when Yo tries to offer him support, noticing that each class he moves farther and farther from the board, becoming more distant from humanity and normalcy. Yo reaffirms that she, Koji, and Omi are there to help him in this tough time, and that just talking might make things better. Of course, she is completely unaware that Fuminori is not only plagued by survivor's guilt following his parents' death, but also by nightmarish visuals as well. This sympathy enrages Fuminori, who cruelly responds that he doesn't ever want to see her again with a cold smile. He also speculates that Yo was only being nice to him, and confessed to him before the accident because others put her up to it, completely rejecting any attempt of human connection from Yo by belittling her. This denial of his friends and society at large is the start of a violent and isolating spiral. Becoming so desperately attached to Saya, Fuminori now doesn't see anyone else of being worthy of his compassion. It's as if Saya is the only human in his perception. Everyone else is beneath them as filthy, inhuman creatures. Watching the whole interaction from the side, Omi, Yo's best friend, angrily runs after Fuminori so that she can tell him off. She has never given Fuminori much grace following the accident, wanting him to just get over it. She ends up at his house, now neglected and eerily quiet inside. That is, until she meets with an Eldritch monster that devours her, who we find out is Saya as Fuminori finds her in the act of eating strange fruit on the floor. Curious at this strange fruit, blind to the fact that it's Omi's body, Fuminori takes a bite and finds it delicious. Saya innocently laughs, "Oh, that's what you like to eat." With Omi missing, Koji becomes suspicious of Fuminori and decides to follow him home. Though Fuminori doesn't go home, he instead goes to an old abandoned house that belonged to Dr. Ogai, a home that's covered in slime, dust, mold, and has a bathtub full of animal bones. That's when Fuminori confronts Koji and tells him to stop poking around and effectively leave his life altogether. After all Fuminori needs is Saya. Later, Fuminori gets bothered by his next-door neighbor, who scolds him on the neglect of his family home, hidden under the guise of advice. "I know it must be very difficult, but you're still young. You have to try and move on with your life." Although it could be agreed that Fuminori should stop wallowing in his suffering, Examples like Omi and the neighbor demanding that he just be normal is the reason why Fuminori has isolated himself from the world altogether, boarding up the windows and giving up any hope at getting better because no one can actually help him. There is something that should probably also be said about the doctors not properly caring for Fuminori. It is said at the start of the visual novel that Fuminori's condition was so bad he had to be physically restrained, which signals that he needed further medical care and mental observation instead of letting him leave the hospital when he stopped screaming. Overall, surface-level attempts at understanding Fuminori's agony only push him further into his own mind and the arms of Saya. However, the apathetic neighbor is punished for his actions when Saya breaks into his home and transforms his mind into something akin to Fuminori's. After reading his medical records and the neurosurgery performed on him, Saya now understands what is required to alter humans' minds and change them. As a result of this switch, the neighbor goes mad and starts destroying everything he once loved that has now become distorted, which includes his wife and child. This madness is only heightened when he sees Saya, a flower in a field of decay, and unfortunately, Saya isn't able to fight off the neighbor when he begins to attack her as well. When Fuminori comes home, he sees Saya being hurt and goes into a rage, turning the neighbor into something unrecognizable. After Fuminori consoles Saya, she reveals to him her newly learned ability to alter minds, which would allow her to fix him. So she asks him, does he want to return to normal or continue existing in this cruel reality with her? Here is where the three endings come into play. If Fuminori says he would like to go back, she undoes the issue in his mind, and eventually Fuminori is thrown into a mental institution for the chaos that unfolded in his neighbor's home. In this white empty cell, Fuminori is no longer a victim to his nightmarish vision, but yet, every day he waits for Saya to come back, like she is a drug he has become addicted to. Each day he hopes and waits that she will not be able to stand being alone and will return to him. Reflecting that Fuminori's love for Saya is toxic, he doesn't want her to ever leave him, always wants her to be thinking about him, and always yearning for him. Saya cannot have a life without Fuminori because Fuminori himself cannot have a life without her. This could be connected to his parents' passing and that he was never able to properly grieve, and thus needed to fill that emptiness with Saya. A common fault of men in particular is not being able to process emotions or allow themselves to feel sad or distraught, instead requiring romantic partners to be the ones to fix them, to bring them happiness and make them whole. But you cannot amend personal issues like depression and anxiety by pushing all those responsibilities on another person. Fuminori's endless desires to see Saya and his hopes that she is lonely without him represent that he doesn't want to grow as a person, and instead chases what feels good to him. Another interesting aspect of this ending is that Fuminori doesn't show much remorse for the pain he's caused his neighbor's family and Omi. He never considers his role in the deaths of others, seemingly finding only Saya, an actual inhuman monster, to be worthy of his tears. If instead you do not choose to go back to normalcy, there is a definite shift in Saya and Fuminori's behavior following the assault. Their actions become darker and more hostile towards others. For Fuminori, that means luring Koji to Dr. Ogai's cabin and pushing him down a well. For Saya, that means breaking Yo's mind by brutally changing her into a monster, a process that turns Yo into what she calls a pet for Fuminori to use. The mutual destruction influences the both of them to do worse and worse things under the perspective that they are simply fighting to stay together. As Fuminori states, "How far will Saya take me? What will I become?" Fortunately though, Koji survives as Ryoko, the surgeon from the hospital, comes to save him. In the well, she finds what the couple has been searching for, Ogai's secret lair where he raised Saya. Ryoko had become obsessed with Ogai and what he had been hiding from the hospital, and after discovering his diaries, she is able to piece together this Lovecraftian puzzle. Saya is not human, and is instead a sort of alien creature whose end goal is to transform the Earth into the fleshy world Fuminori sees in his mind. Being a very intelligent organism, Saya had an insatiable appetite for knowledge, reading every book Ogai could provide her, and soon learning more complex aspects of the human race, like sadness and love. In the diaries, Ogai states that Saya desires connection and love, and it is because of that need that she met Fuminori. To discuss Saya's character deeper for a moment, I believe that although she does immoral things like experiment on and eat humans, Saya is truly just an innocent girl that wanted to understand the world and her place in it, but in the process ran into a tormented man who formed a dependency with her. It could be interpreted that eating Omi and the cats around the hospital are just Saya trying to survive and not an intentionally malicious action. Saya doesn't boast about what she does or who she hurts, even waving away Fuminori when he first discovers her eating the strange fruit. Additionally, when Saya changes Yo into a pet, it could be seen as her just trying to appease Fuminori in her eyes, trying to make him happy, to which he disgustingly indulges in, only encouraging this behavior. And when Saya threatens Yo and others later on in the narrative, it may be due to the influence of Fuminori becoming more and more mad. Saya only understands things like humanity and morality by experiencing them with Fuminori, who actively engages in taboos and violence. Perhaps from her perspective, human love is supposed to be this way, disturbing, selfish, and twisted because that's all Fuminori has ever shown her. Fuminori creates the worst version of Saya, and Saya does nothing but egg Fuminori to do more, spiraling down into mutual depravity. Another thing I would like to touch on is the way that Saya is discussed. Frequently there are mentions of her girlish and young body. I personally think that Saya is, at the least, an adolescent form of her species. This is to say that Saya is not some 3,000-year-old woman who just happens to look young like a lot of people may understand her to be, and instead she is yet another reason Fuminori is so mad. Saya herself is a representation of her madness and is distancing from normal society by breaking multiple laws and moral codes. It could also be interpreted that Fuminori, much older than Saya, is in a way grooming her to be the perfect partner, someone who he can control and someone who will never leave him. Back to the main story, Koji, after escaping from the well with Ryoko, makes a vengeance plan for taking down Fuminori after he discovers how far gone he really is. The only solution to this problem is by destroying Fuminori altogether, similar to how a main character takes down the grand villain or how a court system hands down the death penalty to a criminal. In retaliation, Fuminori develops a plan against Koji by moving his, quote, family, Saya and Yo, to an abandoned sanitarium and buying an axe as a weapon. The need to relocate is a stark reminder that this kind of relationship is not stable, as if they will always be on the run. Eventually, they have their showdown, where regardless of choice, Koji will enter the sanitarium and run into Yo, who now begs for the pain to end. Koji, terrified at what he's seeing, fires his weapon until no bullets are left. After surviving his interaction with the transformed Yo, Fuminori tries to sneak up on Koji, and the two begin a deadly fight. When Fuminori begins to lose due to him having lost weight and becoming physically weaker, Saya wraps around Koji's legs and begins to kill him. If Koji decided to call Ryoko and ask her for assistance before driving to the sanitarium, Ryoko will come in and blow Saya away with her shotgun, saving Koji's life. Ryoko and Fuminori then get into a struggle which ends with Ryoko taking a blow, and Koji being given a container of liquid nitrogen. When poured on Saya, her Eldritch form becomes vulnerable to damage, which makes her all the more easy to eliminate. With Saya gone, Fuminori seemingly doesn't see a reason to keep going. The only person who mattered in the world no longer exists, leaving Fuminori completely alone again. Picking up the axe, Fuminori takes his own life in a brutal way, reflecting his insanity, like an addict overdosing on their own drug. The extreme dependency ends. Koji, the sole survivor of the showdown, finally finds peace, but at the cost of his mental state, which is throttled by PTSD and hallucinations. Toxic and dangerous relationships don't only affect themselves, they traumatize the people around them. However, this is not the true ending of Saya no Uta. If Koji decides not to strategize with Ryoko, he doesn't get the protection he needs from Saya and ends up dead. The one close friend group, now a fleeting memory. After surviving the showdown, Fuminori rushes to Saya as she starts making pained sounds. Yet, Saya isn't fatally hurt. She's actually giving birth. In her final show of true love and perhaps a final wifely act, Saya blooms like a flower and releases spores that change Earth into a grotesque version of itself. In the end, Saya no Uta intends to leave the player deeply disturbed, presented with an extreme example of just how inhuman a man can become. One can question if Saya is even truly cruel at all, or if it is Fuminori's deeply twisted desires that manifest itself through Saya. Although we are meant to sympathize with Fuminori for what happened to him, we are at no point to believe he is a good person. At the very least, it is clear that Fuminori is deeply flawed, not seeking the support he should. If we take the story a little less literally, this story could be a metaphor for a range of traumas and how afterwards someone can find their world completely changed, with the spiral of Fuminori and Saya also showing how people who have been hurt can then hurt others as a result of a distorted worldview. In this sense, Saya no Uta is a cautionary tale about the danger of isolation and not seeking help from others. No matter how bad it can seem, we cannot afford to give up on our humanity, lest we find ourselves transforming into the monster Fuminori became. And with that, I think I have said all I have to say about Saya no Uta. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you to my subscribers and Patreon supporters, and see you next week.